People whispered that Admiral Ross Hale had survived storms that should have broken any man alive, wars, loss, sleepless nights on steel decks. But none of them knew that the moment that nearly crushed him didn't happen on the ocean. It happened in a quiet restaurant on a rainy evening, when a stranger looked him in the eye and told him he wasn't good enough. And none of them knew that the person who would pick him back up wasn't a commander, a soldier, or a hero, but a janitor. A single dad. A man who swept floors for a living yet carried the strength of someone who had survived his own battles. But before their worlds collided, Ross Hale had to walk straight into heartbreak, and you're about to see exactly how the storm began. Admiral Ross Hale arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. It wasn't nerves, at least that's what he told himself, but the truth was he had spent half an hour in his car rehearsing how to introduce himself. Blind dates weren't his thing. They felt too vulnerable, too personal. But after years of isolation and reminders from doctors that he needed to slow down and actually live, he had finally given in. His sister had set this one up. She's kind, funny, mature, she promised. Someone who understands that strength isn't only about muscles. Ross quietly hoped she was right. He smoothed his uniform jacket even though he wasn't wearing it. Tonight he had chosen a simple navy blue button-down. Still, he carried himself like a man trained to command ships, straight back, calm breath, eyes steady. He had spent years maintaining composure in front of crews who depended on him. But tonight he felt something unfamiliar trembling under the surface. Insecurity. Doubt. That voice that whispered he didn't look like the lean 20-year-old officer he once was. That he was older now, thicker around the waist, a man who had given his life to his country and carried the physical reminders of stress and duty. When his date, Melissa, walked in, she looked around with polite disinterest until her gaze landed on him. Ross stood to greet her with a gentle smile. "Melissa," he asked warmly. She hesitated, eyes scanning him quickly, his broad frame, his fuller face, the tiredness that no amount of sleep could erase. Her lips tightened. "Oh," she said, almost under her breath. "You're Admiral Hale." Ross didn't miss the tone. It wasn't surprise. It was disappointment. He pulled out her chair, trying to keep the atmosphere light. She sat reluctantly, crossing her arms. The waiter set down menus, but she didn't touch hers. Ross tried again. "Thank you for meeting me. I know blind dates aren't easy." She exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm just going to be honest because I don't want to waste time. You're not what I expected." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. First impressions rarely tell the whole story." "No," she said bluntly, "I mean physically. You're just not my type. My sister said you were athletic." Ross's throat tightened. "I used to be." "Well, you're clearly not anymore." The words hit like a fist. He swallowed, trying to stay composed. He wasn't angry, just stunned at the naked cruelty. "Melissa," he said softly, "I didn't show up here trying to impress you. I showed up hoping for a real conversation." She closed her menu and stood. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in dating someone your size." Ross froze. He felt heat rise in his cheeks, humiliation choking him. His instinct was to apologize, as though he had done something wrong simply by existing. But he didn't. He just nodded, jaw tight. "Of course," he whispered. She grabbed her purse and walked out without looking back. Ross sat there alone, lungs tight, heart heavy. He wasn't supposed to feel like this. He had survived war zones, command failures, stormy seas. He had held broken sailors in his arms, comforted grieving families, pushed his body through fatigue that would make most men collapse, but somehow this moment, hurt worse than everything else. He lowered his head, rubbing the bridge of his nose, trying to breathe through the sting gathering behind his eyes. A grown man. A decorated officer. Feeling small, unwanted, ashamed. He whispered to himself, "Get it together, Ross." And that's when he heard a chair scrape beside him, soft, hesitant, then a gentle voice said, "Sir, you don't look all right. Are you okay?" That was the moment his story changed. The voice belonged not to a commander or a colleague or a stranger passing by, but to the janitor sweeping the floor nearby. A man with tired eyes, worn shoes, and a kindness that cut straight through the darkness settling over Ross Hale's heart. The janitor, Evan Cole, was a single dad in his early 30s with a soft, steady voice. His uniform shirt was slightly faded, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and his hands were rough from years of work. He had the look of someone who carried quiet responsibilities on his shoulders, the kind that didn't come with medals, but mattered just as much. Ross blinked, surprised anyone had approached him. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "Just a rough evening." Evan didn't pretend not to see through the lie. "I was sweeping over there," he said, pointing behind him, "and I saw her walk in and walk right back out. Then I saw your face. Honestly, man, nobody deserves to be treated like that." Ross stared at the table. "It happens. People judge. But they don't know your story," Evan said gently. "And they don't get to write it either." Ross looked up slowly. There was something disarming about Evan, a warmth without pity, compassion without condescension. Ross exhaled, tension easing just a little. "Thank you," Ross said. "I appreciate it." Evan nodded, leaning his broom against the table. "Most people don't know what others carry. My little girl thinks I'm a superhero, but I struggle every day. Still, I try not to let anyone make me feel small." Ross couldn't help but smile. "Your daughter sounds wise." "She's 6, Evan chuckled. "But she calls it how she sees it." Ross felt something loosen in his chest, the kind of release that comes from realizing you aren't as alone as you think. "You don't have to tell me what happened," Evan added, "but if you want someone to sit for a minute, I've got 10 before I go clean the kitchen." Ross hesitated only a second before nodding. "I'd like that." Evan slid into the chair across from him. For a moment they sat quietly, the restaurant humming softly around them. Ross finally spoke. "She said I wasn't her type," he murmured. "Said I wasn't athletic enough." Evan winced. "That's cold." "It's all right," Ross said, forcing a faint smile. "I've given my life to the Navy. It takes a toll. I know I'm not who I used to be." Evan shook his head. "Man, nobody stays who they used to be. I sure didn't. My wife passed when my daughter was 3. I gained weight. Lost weight. Gained it again. Stress changes a person. Grief changes a person. Life changes a person. Doesn't mean you're any less worthy." Ross felt the words like a balm he didn't know he needed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Really?" Evan smiled. "Someone should tell you. You walk like a man carrying the world. Maybe someone should remind you that you don't have to carry it alone." Ross looked at him for a long moment. Then he asked, "What's your daughter's name?" "Lily," Evan said, eyes lighting up. "She wants to be a sailor one day. Says ships look like floating dragons." Ross laughed, a genuine, warm sound that surprised even him. "Maybe I could give her a tour sometime," he said. "If that's all right with you." Evan's smile softened, almost humbled. "Sir, she'd never forget it." In that moment, the weight on Ross's chest eased, not because the rejection vanished, but because someone had chosen to see him differently. To remind him he was more than a number on a scale or a first impression in a restaurant, and for Evan, he wasn't talking to an admiral. He was talking to a man who needed kindness. The storm inside Ross Hale didn't disappear that night, but it began to break, and neither of them yet knew just how much their lives were about to change.